Well, as we've heard, the Australian Workers' Union and the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry are calling on the RBA to lower rates, claiming the central bank is making the wrong decisions. The Australian Industry Group also says there's a mounting case for a rate cut. To talk about this, I'm joined by Professor Warwick McKibbin, who's fresh off the RBA board, and he joins us from Canberra. Professor Warwick McKibbin, good morning. Has the RBA been getting it right?
Good morning, Joe. Yes, I think they have been getting it right. And you can see that in the low unemployment numbers of around 5.2% and inflation sitting right in the band. Australian economy is doing very well on average, but there are some sectors that are very badly being hurt by the mining boom. And that's, I think, where the pressure is being applied from.
It was a pretty tight call, though, at the last meeting.
Again, if you look at where we're sitting in Australia, we're looking at serious dangers in Europe, and they're getting worse overnight. But we're managing an economy which is growing very strongly in the mining industries, and this really is a problem that monetary policy actually shouldn't be the instrument that's dealing with it. It should be the government policies across the board, and unfortunately they're just not tackling this appropriately.
So what do you make of the ACCI's call for a 50 basis point cut?
Well, again, the danger here is that we cut rates too much and we think that monetary policy is going to solve the problem. The problem is that the real exchange rate in Australia has to appreciate. That's part of the adjustment process. You can either get that through a strong currency or you can get it through high inflation. In the 70s, we got it through high inflation, and the devastation of the 90s was the consequence. The bank is being very forward-looking in doing the right thing and letting this be taken on the currency rather than the overall price inflation nexus, which impacts on all Australians. Taking it on the currency definitely impacts on traded goods sectors like steel, like aluminium, like tourism, and that's why we're getting such shrill noises coming from union leaders in those industries.
Yeah, well, Paul Howes has suggested this morning that the charter of the Reserve Bank needs to be looked at so it can be broadened so the bank can move to bring down the Australian dollar to protect the manufacturing industry. What do you make of that?
It just doesn't work. I mean, if we know countries that have fixed exchange rates, for example, take China fixing to the US dollar, they're getting 6% inflation plus coming down the road at them because they have to have the adjustment. It's not a wish list of union leaders that we don't need to do what's happening. It's inevitable given the increase in demand for what we sell in certain parts of our economy, and that's the reality. We know from the 70s that if we let the unions drive policy, you end up with very high inflation, you end up with policy eventually being pushed to extreme levels, and you end up with a major recession. The Reserve Bank doesn't want that, I don't want that, and I think this shows you the danger of minority government, where small parts of the economy, and Paul Howes represents a very small part of the economy in terms of union members and industry, are trying to drive the national policy agenda, and it's very dangerous if governments are influenced by these types of minorities.
Well, the government has flatly rejected this proposal this morning, but Paul Howes is concerned the manufacturing industry is going to be wiped out. Do you accept that that is a possibility?
Well, what's happening is there's many things happening to the manufacturing industry. Yes, the Australian dollar is hurting our competitiveness, but so are input costs. Wages are too high, efficiency is too low, cost of capital is too high. There's a whole range of factors. If the union movement was serious about saving manufacturing, then they would pull back from some of the industrial action that's going on. They would lower the real costs of labour into some of these sectors, and they would work with industry to try and solve the problem. Part of the issue here is we have had excess demand in this economy from the stimulus package of 2008, which was too big, and now we're paying the consequences. The danger is that we try and pull it out in an ad hoc way and we do massive fiscal adjustment in the next budget. There has to be a fiscal consolidation. There has to be a reasonably clear debt target. But to just arbitrarily wipe large parts of government spending without any cost-benefit analysis on which investments are giving us the highest rate of return in the government sector, again, is a mistake upon a mistake. And that's what worries me, is the vested interests, whether it's the Greens, the union movement, or the minority members of the government, are really driving this government into the wrong policy decisions.
What do you make of the government's commitment to getting the budget back to surplus by next year?
Again, it's a completely arbitrary and political target. It was made at a time when the forecasts looked like it would naturally go back into surplus. We do need a debt target. Our debt is too high at around 25% of GDP, but it's far below the rest of the world, and it's much more sustainable than most industrial countries. We should have had an announcement of a debt target. We should have had a policy of bringing the deficit down based on some transparent process where the conditions in the economy were taken into account to when the cuts occurred. Again, it's purely a political decision, and it could be very dangerous if, in fact, Europe goes into a deeper recession as a result of their mismanagement of their monetary policy and fiscal policy. We may want to be doing another small fiscal stimulus in this country in June this year, and instead we're locking ourselves into a $20 to $40 billion fiscal cut. It's very, very bad pro-cyclical fiscal policy. Although the broad goals are correct, we need not to have the debt go out of control, but it's not out of control and it needs to be done in a sensible, managed way.
The government says this is an important sign for to the Reserve Bank that the government is acting responsibly and prudently.
Again, if the government really drives the Australian economy into a recession by cutting government spending too quickly, of course the Reserve Bank will cut interest rates. But that's not a good way of running policy. The two-speed economy, the multi-speed economy, should be managed not through interest rate policy, it should be managed through fiscal and tax transfer policy. And I just don't see the government understanding that particular way of dealing with it. The Reserve Bank is the policy of last resort, and if you look at the record for the last 10 years, the Reserve Bank has done a better job than any other central bank in the world. To tinker with it now and to argue, as Paul Howes does, that there's something wrong with the process just shows how out of touch he is with economics and the Australian economy on the whole, rather than just his own vested interest.